Hey, it's Susie from Flawed Theology. We had some issues with audio and connectivity while recording, so we apologize that my audio is not up to our usual standards, but we hope that you enjoy the Season 2 premiere.
Hi, welcome to the Season 2 premiere of the Flawed Theology podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Susie, and we're asking the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
Well, we're back after the holiday break. It seems like I don't know how long we were off. It seems like it went by really fast now that it's over.
It did.
So
We're back.
Season 2, we're excited to be here. Two new segments that we're going to launch, and we'll have both of those today later in this show. Two new segments. One of them is going to be called The Good Human of the Week, where we will highlight the idea that morality doesn't come from God, and we are going to find real life stories of people who are doing good and being good in the community. So we'll have a powerful story about that coming up later in the show today. And then the second new feature is what we're calling Flawed Theology in Real Life, which I'm real excited about this one.
Yeah, this one's pretty fun.
It seems like there's always so many things that happen, especially you see on social media, where you just see the idea of people's theology and its flaws on full display.
Yeah, it's good practice to hone our critical thinking skills.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that, like, when we're talking about these things, you'll see later we talk about it, it's not to like bang up on Christians and like
Not at all.
talk down about them. It's really to point out the way they're viewing the world is truly logically flawed. Like there's problems with that type of thinking.
Yeah.
What else do we have coming on? We decided that we're going to try to have a more organized release schedule, because if you remember last season, it was like,
It's like whenever the hell we felt like it. We released an episode.
Hey, we were going to record on this day and we're going to release whenever we feel like it. So we're going to try to be a little bit more consistent. And our plan is to release an episode every other week on Sundays. That's our plan, because we want to keep you out of church. No, just kidding.
But we do.
But we just also think it's funny to release it right at church time on Sundays. So that way, if your evangelical parents saying, hey, have you found a church yet? You can say, yeah, we found Flawed Theology Baptist. It's a great
Flawed Theology Baptist.
it's a great community. I'm getting a lot out of it. I'm really getting spiritually fed. So
That'd be a terrible name for a church.
Yeah, I'd love to see what's on that church sign.
Yes.
That'd be great. And then I guess the other big thing is, hopefully the next episode or the one after, we are going to have Bart Campolo on as a guest. And so for those of you who don't know Bart Campolo, he's the son of Tony Campolo, who is a massive evangelical preacher. Actually a pretty good guy in the realm of Christianity. He's not like a fire and brimstone judgmental Christian. He does a lot of good in the world, but his son Bart deconverted and is now like a humanist chaplain.
Yeah, at USC.
A lot of really cool work. So we're going to be talking to him.
So the one thing I want to say about this, though, so we're going to have him on. We'll be releasing his episode in like a month, right?
Yeah.
2 weeks from this episode. Okay. 2 weeks from when this episode comes out. So that will give people time. If you do want to read his book, It's called Why I Left, Why I Stayed, or Why I Stayed, Why I Left. I can't remember which order it is. And it's short. So if you want to read it in like 2 weeks, you can. Or just watch the YouTube documentary. We'll link to it. Leaving My Father's Faith, right?
Yeah, Leaving My Father's Faith. They're two really good.
It's really good.
Give you like a really interesting overview. I mean, I found it especially powerful reading his book because my dad is a pastor too. And so a lot of what he went through, was on a bigger scale than what I experienced, but it really resonated with me. So
a more public scale for sure.
Yeah, definitely more public scale. So what's been going on with you? What did you do over the break time? Do you have any like big happenings, anything that stood out to you as far as
I did
in the realm of deconversion? What was something that happened?
Right. So here's what happened. So my sister had a baby, her first baby, a year ago, and ever since she told me that she was pregnant, I have kind of been very apprehensive about the dedication. She's Seventh-day Adventist, which I've mentioned before. They don't do infant baptism, they just do a dedication. So anyway, I've been dreading this because I knew I'd have to go back to church. And who wants to go back to church, right? Like I have nightmares about walking into churches and people staring at me because they know I'm a heathen.
Right.
But I told myself, just put all that aside. This is not about you. This is about being there for your nephew and your sister, who I love dearly. We have a great relationship. So anyway, we get to her church and 45 minutes in is when the dedication starts. I didn't make it 10 seconds before I stormed out. So here's what happened. The pastor invited the whole family up to the front of the church. My sister told me beforehand, don't go up because they're going to ask you if you're going to, support and affirm the child in their faith. And obviously we're not going to do that. So she said, stay back.
Right.
Which I was happy to do, extremely happy to do.
Yeah. That's nice that she gave you that out.
Yeah, she did give me a heads up on that. Yep. So I'm sitting in the back and I think, oh, well, I'm not up there. I have a great vantage point back here. I'm going to start recording on my phone so that she has, she'll have this forever.
Yeah.
The pastor starts talking and the first thing out of his mouth is that
we live in an era of unbelief where children are taught to have no values.
Secularism is a religion.
Secularism is a religion. The religion of the Bible is a religion. One of them's right, the other's not. And how do we know? The fruit is how we know.
10 seconds, I'm out the door.
You left like a vapor trail.
I get out in the lobby of the church, and unbeknownst to me, there's a huge TV there that's broadcasting what's happening inside the church. And so I'm still being assaulted by like these words.
God so designs it that little will grow up to be a person of virtue.
So I had to go out, leave the church, go outside.
Right.
But not before turning around and I saw the image of my whole family on that monitor and me not being there and me having to leave. It was just a very surreal moment that kind of epitomized how I felt my whole life and not fitting into my family.
Yeah.
So after I left, I obviously didn't hear what else the pastor said until you and I had a conversation a few days ago when I said, we should talk about this. I want to play the video clip, right? And you said, well, try to find it on YouTube so we can listen to the whole thing. So that's the first time I listened to the whole thing. And the first time that I saw my parents' faces as the pastor was saying this. And it was so hurtful to see my mom when the pastor says, secular kids have no morals.
Yeah, she's nodding her head.
She's nodding yes, yes.
Did you feel a little bit of a sense of relief that you weren't up there knowing that you've escaped this and your kids are not going to be subjected to that kind of mind manipulation?
Yes, that relief is definitely there, but it's a double-edged thing.
Yeah.
It comes at a cost. And the cost is that my whole family thinks I'm evil, I guess. Not my whole family. To move on to the next part, I called my sister that night and I talked to her about it because we're pretty open. We have open communication. So I talked to her about what the pastor said made me feel. And it opened up we talked for 2 hours about religion and our, perspectives on it. So there was some good that came out of it. We actually scheduled another night to talk about it. What I'm trying to say is that some good is coming out of it, but it also hurts to know that my mother thinks that I'm irreparably harming my children. My children can never be good.
Right.
I'm terrible. The pastor even said, who wants to have a lost child?
Who wants our children to be lost?
Ooh. Yeah, you sent me the link, and I don't think I got much further than you did, in real life, because I was I can't even.
It's terrible.
But I mean, it's awesome that it led to something hopefully productive. The difference between a situation like this for you and if it was the other way around for a Christian is you're not trying to proselytize your sister to your way of thinking. You're just trying to encourage her to think here, just look at this from outside the box that you're in, and maybe that conversation sparks something in her that, maybe will eventually lead to her deconstructing some things, but that's not your real goal.
I'm trying not to make that my goal.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would be ecstatic if she decided to deconvert.
Right.
However, I'm trying not to go about it that way. Just as I would be upset if she tried to make me convert.
Right.
The other thing is that she told me that the pastor already knew that we were atheist. So that just makes it worse. Did he say it on purpose or did he just not care how that would make me feel?
That's wild. That's wild stuff. Yeah. So over my holiday, I saw my parents for the first time in 3 years, thanks to COVID and their refusal to get vaccinated. So we met them up in upstate New York at Legoland because I was if you guys want to come and see the kids, we will be outside and you have to buy your own tickets. But
does your 5-year-old even remember them?
My 3-year-old doesn't even know them at
that's right, you
all.
have a
My
3-year-old.
5-year-old didn't remember them really. She was very young when they last saw them, and my older kids kind of remembered them. But I was like, oh, and my parents are going to be there, and my 12-year-old goes, "Yay!" like with a question mark, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel. But it went well. It went fine. Like, it was not, awkward. It was nice to see them, and there was no discussion about my atheism or any of that.
Good.
But like, I'm in Pennsylvania, and there's churches just like everywhere. We're like driving. I drove past one, and it was like this massive campus, like just a huge sprawling campus. And I'm thinking about how much money that building costs, and like, how much their pastor makes. And I'm thinking, like, what a big waste churches in general are.
I wonder how full it actually is on a Sunday, because when we went to my sister's church, it's this enormous building. Like, I thought it was a mega church.
Right.
But we walked in and there's like 40 people there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true. That's true in some churches. Well, it got me thinking, because like our topic today is about the kind of de-Christianization of America, and like all these churches that I saw, it just got me thinking about like how pervasive Christian culture is in our society, and how it just seems normal, but there's a definite shifting in what's happening in America with Christianity.
Yeah.
It's funny, coming out of evangelicalism myself, like, you live in this mindset that, the United States is this Christian nation, and it was founded on biblical principles, and that the reason our country is a superpower is because God has blessed it, and then when you get out, you realize that literally none of that is true.
None of it's true.
This is not a Christian nation. It was not founded on biblical principles. And Christianity, they're the majority, or they, for the longest time, were the majority religion. But at the same time, Christians want to claim that they're the minority and they're being persecuted. Which is it? We thought it'd be fun to start a segment, and we're calling it Good Human of the Week. And the motivation behind this segment is to kind of push back on the idea that you can't be a good human without some kind of eternal, religious, spiritual motivation. Because there's a lot of people that think there is no morality without God. And obviously, we would vehemently disagree with that. So we lucked out to have a guest today, Carrie, who's going to share a little bit about some stuff that she went through and how people have rallied around her and her husband to support them. So welcome, Carrie, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we kind of chat through Facebook. Carrie and her husband are photographers. They're artists. Carrie is a really accomplished artist. She's illustrated a bunch of children's books, which I should have had him here, because my kids have both of them so far, and they love them. The Fork Who Ate Spaghetti is one of my 5-year-old's favorite books. She loves it. So Carrie illustrated that book, and another one about the fork who eats cake. So Carrie, tell us a little bit about like your background and kind of your story, with your deconversion, and kind of where you came from and where you are now.
Yeah, so I grew up, from the time that I was born, I was in an evangelical community. We were Southern Baptist to start with, and then ended up having a massive church split, and it was still Southern Baptist, but they liked to call themselves like non-denominational Baptist. And then ended up in a Calvary chapel at one point, a Calvinist youth group for a few years, went to school at a Southern Baptist university, and then landed in a Bethel adjacent church in Missouri.
Wow.
Which is where my husband and I got married, and really, like, became our final boss self.
Right.
So your whole life up till this point, were you a genuine believer?
Oh yeah, like
okay.
A very, very
okay.
committed, like mission trips in Africa, and we were of the minority who truly believed that God had called us to tithe 20% before taxes.
Yikes.
So we were like in that kind of frame of like, God is always going to take care of us. There's never going to be any reason ever to ever have to worry about anything. And clearly that was just such a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of issues leading up to our departure, but we still were fully committed and still tithing 20%, even though we had at some point our business really tanked because of where we were living, and the way that we were getting business had changed. We had moved to France. We were in France for 7 years. And the quality of our work was just not giving us the type of business that we needed to have a successful business. We were still working a lot, but just not. It was just not a comfortable life in any way. We were just having to like scrimp on everything, and we had that. Okay, are we doing the right things? Like, where are we supposed to be? But like, we knew like God had opened all the doors for us to be there. And we had felt like before we went that we were supposed to be like missionaries without being like missionaries with support, because we have the means to support ourselves with our businesses. So we knew that like we weren't going to have to raise funds as missionaries. And like, it just, it all kind of started falling apart. And my husband was like nightly like begging God for direction. We ended up at this kind of crossroads where we were like, we will do anything. We will go anywhere, anything at all. We'll leave, we'll pick up and move wherever. And like silence.
Mm-hmm.
We started understanding that the only times that we had really heard God was when we already had in our heads a potential direction.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
We already knew kind of the path ahead of us. So we knew, okay, like if this is the potential direction, and that a door opens for us to move into that direction, then that's what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that must be God. And when there was no path and there was no direction and there was no anything for us to like even consider, there was no answer.
Mm.
It was just radio silence. So we started like putting the puzzle pieces together and pulling on that thread. And then we started looking at everything. And it collapsed within months.
Months. Wow.
Mine had been a long thing. So I'm also queer. Mine started collapsing once I identified and accepted my queerness.
Mm-hmm.
So that started for me in like 2010. But I wasn't letting myself accept that for myself. I just knew that about myself, but I wasn't like living like openly queer.
Right.
Like I started to like question a lot of things starting in 2010. I mean, it was a very long and arduous process for me, but for my husband, it was like those months that he can pinpoint pieces that like connected the dots for him along the way that got him to the point where he was willing to start pulling the threads. But like his was a very short and mine was very long, and they ended at the same juncture.
That's very fortunate, actually, that you ended at the same time.
We are incredibly lucky. We tell each other every day, at least every week, that our 15 and a half year marriage is held together by trauma bonding and laziness. So, I don't have the energy to explain our trauma to anyone else. So it's it's me and him forever.
Yeah. Well,
we're in it.
To go.
And I mean, we love each other. Don't get me wrong, but like, it's the idea of having to explain that to another human being is just like what kind of exhaustion that would take.
Right.
Yeah. So you guys moved back not too long ago from France to New York.
August 20th
of this year.
Yes.
Wow.
You had a pretty rough year. Like you had a surgery. You decided an international move, like a lot of stuff, and then you moved back to the States, found an awesome apartment.
It was perfect. Amazing apartment. Moved into the new apartment. We put down this enormous broker's fee for it and this huge deposit and all of these things. It's New York City. It's a huge investment on the front end. Less than 4 months later. So December 3rd, we had a 5-alarm fire, which is the biggest amount that you can have, like, measurably. There were over 200 firefighters to put it out. It took over 6 hours, and there was asbestos in the building. So anything that wasn't affected by fire was drowned in asbestos water.
Oh, geez.
So anything that touched the asbestos that's porous was gone. So we lost all of the furniture, all of the rugs and clothes. Our closets were just drenched.
Yeah.
I was able to get in a few weeks ago for like a tiny amount of time. And I got out my grandpa's vintage books that are the only thing I have from him. I got out my grandma's sewing kit, which was in the one of the only dry places in the apartment. It was under the bed. And I got out our wedding rings.
Yeah. So then I guess you posted something about the fire and losing all your stuff and then, trying to find a place to live. And I think you posted a GoFundMe link.
So actually, that's one of the people.
Or someone else started the GoFundMe for you.
So one of my ex-evangelical friends, lifelong friends, who went to the same Calvinist youth group in high school that I went to. She made the GoFundMe, and she just messaged me and she said, "I did this. I did not asking for permission, and and I'm doing this." And then another one of our classmates and ex-evangelicals that's in our circle immediately called me. She's also in Manhattan, and she said, "Come to my apartment." So it's this like amazing connections of these ex-Calvinist friends that all went to high school with me and to this same youth group with me, and we're all still connected. And they were the first ones that said, like, "Come, like we're gonna take care of you."
Yeah. That's awesome.
Did you notice whether there was a difference between the religious and the non-religious response to your trauma? Like,
I would say we had a lot of very surprising donations from religious people that I wouldn't have expected. This is a fun little fact. Almost all of the religious friends and relatives who donated to us donated anonymously, not realizing that I could see who had donated because I'm the recipient.
Right.
So all of these people who we have either cut them off or they have cut us off. We had several of them donate anonymously.
Oh, interesting.
Who thought we wouldn't know.
Why do you think that is? Like, do they just not want to admit to the public that, oh, we're helping out these queer atheists now?
Or they didn't want Carrie to know.
I think they didn't want us to know because these are broken relationships.
Maybe they're not as broken as you think they are.
Oh, no.
They're broken. Okay.
They're very broken.
I can see it in your face.
No,
they're broken.
No. They're incredibly harmful relationships that I don't accept that kind of harm. Like tacitly, openly supporting gay conversion therapy type of relationships.
Oh, no.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So there was also like non-religious organizations who stepped in. So I don't think Red Cross is a religious organization.
I don't think so.
As a Christian, I grew up hearing that Red Cross was not an organization we should donate to.
Because it's not religious?
Because it's not religious. And so we were raised with this mantra of if you do anything that's good and you don't do it in the name of Jesus, it's as filthy rags. It means nothing.
Right.
There is nothing about it that provides any value. So if you go on a humanitarian trip, and you save people's lives as Doctors Without Borders, and you don't take the gospel to them, you're actually like killing people because then they're reliant. This is like the idea that we were raised with. And so having the Red Cross come in and be the first stepping point and seeing how they function in the first 48 hours of tragedy, immediately I was just like, how did I never know that this organization was so incredible? This is an organization that I want to donate to now.
Going back to what you were saying about if you don't do good in the name of Jesus, then it's like filthy rags.
Yes.
Did Jesus ever say that? So, I mean, I don't know my Bible that well, but I'm thinking back and I'm pretty sure Jesus just said, take care of the poor.
Yeah, exactly.
And he didn't have any strings attached, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's totally like a human adaptation because they would say like, well, it doesn't matter if you go and build a school in Rwanda because you're leaving their soul to burn in hell.
That's
so
it.
Who cares if they have education and running water and medicine? It doesn't matter because once they die, they're just going to go burn in hell. So if you're not bringing the gospel to them, you're only meeting one need as opposed to all their eternal needs.
Their eternal needs are worth so much more.
Right. They're worth way more than any school or anything that you could build for them or all that kind of stuff. So imagine if you had gone through this tragedy as a Christian. Can you still remember that mindset of how it felt to be supported? Like right now, you're super grateful to all these people and organizations that did this stuff, like all out of the goodness of their heart and out of their motivation of this is what we should do to help people, where Christians might do the exact same action, but all their motivation is from the place of I'm doing this to earn God's favor because God wants me to do it. How does that feel different to you?
I mean, I will say we still have some Christian friends who were like very proactive, like extremely proactive and very caring. So I don't want to discount all Christians on this, like,
yeah,
Right.
for sure.
because we had, like, including my parents, which are like very still deeply into the evangelical church and have done, I mean, above and beyond for us. Not because of religion, but because of the way they love us. So, I mean, I want to give credit to that, but it is really, I think the expectation as a Christian would be that, like, my church members I would just know that they would take care of me, because that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
It would be shared within that church family. They would be sharing the information to, like, help fund us. Whereas, like, a few people shared our GoFundMe, but, like, not in any kind of way that we would have seen if we were in a church community. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? You have
Yeah.
to be in the in-group.
It's the in-group. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the biggest points that is, like, this was why I was so conflicted about talking about this, is because we have so much support, because we're well connected, and we're well connected to a lot of very wealthy people who have been very generous with us, and our neighbors are very well connected to not very wealthy people.
Right.
Though their circle have been just as generous, it is not reflected because they're not as wealthy.
Yeah.
So this is just, it's really hard for me to, like, look at this and feel like it's a feel good story, because we're seeing with our other very well connected tenants that were in the building how well we're being taken care of, whilst our fellow tenants are suffering.
So
Yeah.
this is the perspective when you're in the church and you think you're so blessed because you're only seeing your own situation and you're ignorant of what you're saying. All your neighbors who don't have the same situation, they don't have the same resources, they don't have the same opportunities, but you are staying in your own little bubble and you continue to think that you're blessed. But you have a different outlook. You're seeing from a higher perspective, like you're more zoomed out.
Very much.
And you can see that you're not the only one in your building. Mm-hmm. And while if you were a Christian, it might be easy for you to say, oh, God showed me so much support and everything. But then you look at your neighbors and where's God's support for them?
Yeah, fully.
If 90% of your building are God's chosen, blessed children, why are you getting massive financial support when you have turned your back on God?
And why did he burn the building down anyway?
That's the thing.
It's because an atheist lived there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. It's me.
Yeah. And then it's funny because I can hear, like, Christians would say, oh, well, this is all God reaching out to you to show you that even though you've turned your back on him, he still cares about you. And don't you want to come back to him because he sent you a check from this donor and that donor?
Because he burned your building down.
Yeah, thank you for burning my building down so that I could see your goodness.
Right, exactly. Like, it's so, you see now on the other side, like, that sounds so dumb, but, like, I guarantee that 80% of people would say this was all part of God's plan for, us to lose our thing because God has something so much better for us, but all of them don't have anything better and you somehow do.
Yeah, we're housed and we have, like, we're in a place that has a kitchen. Like, our other tenants are living in shelters right now.
Right.
With shared bathrooms and no kitchens.
Yeah.
The fact that we have friends who have given us their own bed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The mental gymnastics that Christians go through to tell themselves that something is going to work together for good.
Right.
Or tell themselves that there's, some magical, mythical, grand reason behind things, and that God, mysterious ways, is so insidious.
That's a good word.
It is so insidious.
Yeah.
And it is so mind-numbingly infuriating because they're so grateful for their lives. They're so grateful that they lived and that nobody lost their lives in the fire. And they're praising God for that. My father, if he knew what was going to happen in that building, he would have done everything in his power to stop it.
Yes.
Everything. Right. Because he's a good father.
And he loves you.
And he loves me. And he wants what's best for me. There should never be a further discussion than that.
Yes.
Right. What you're saying just shows the whole point of this segment is, like, there are people in the world that do good and are good because they're human.
Yeah.
And they care about their fellow human.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we really appreciate you like coming on and sharing this, just demonstrating in real life, good human. There's so many good people in the world. And it's easy to forget that there are good people in the world because there's so much shit in the world too. Yeah. But there's so many people that are doing good just for the sake of being good. They're not doing it for any eternal reward. They're not doing it they're not even doing it for the pat on the back. You know, they're doing it because they care about you and Caleb, and they just want you to thrive and get back to the life that you want to have.
And I appreciate how you pointed out that there are Christians who supported you in ways other than thoughts and prayers. So often I get so annoyed by the thoughts and prayers thing. And I think it's easy to forget that, you know, they do actually help people as well. But I think that what this boils down to is that there are people who do things for non-religious reasons, and they really stepped up and helped you in your time of need.
Massively. Like I could list off like hundreds of names. These aren't Christians doing this for Christian reasons. These are just people who are seeing somebody that they care about suffering and wanting to take care of that person and ease some of that suffering. It's not about doing it to get brownie points or to, you know, make sure that you're, you know, showing God that you're willing to give. You know, like it's not about that selflessness. It's not about like, oh yes, you know, I may not have much, but I'm willing to give it all. That like
the humble brag.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was talking about the parable of the woman with the penny and the, you know, she gave it all.
Well, and then they're meeting your tangible needs. They're not just saying, I'll pray for you and God cares about you and God has a plan. They're saying, here's a gift card, here's money, here's food, here's here's things that you're going to need in your new place. Like,
they came around us in a massive way. Yeah. It is incredibly important to find the people who are suffering and find the people who have the need and be willing to like give to them. It's definitely a life lesson in making sure that you're taking care of your neighbors and taking care of the people that you may or may not know who are suffering.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Those are powerful words.
If you are okay with it, and if you want to, we would be willing to put the GoFundMe links in the show notes when we post it. It's completely up to you. I know you were unsure about, like, you don't want it to come across as like, I'm going on this podcast just so I can.
It's really important to me to share the tenant for our building GoFundMe. Most of our fellow tenants didn't even have renter's insurance.
So you have a GoFundMe for the, like, a pool thing for the tenants? Okay.
That's cool.
And the Tenants Association is in charge of the disbursement of the money. And they are incredibly, very, very good human beings who are like in charge of it. Who it's not just going to some random place. So if I could share that GoFundMe, because
absolutely,
that's the one that I am very much terrified for our neighbors.
Yeah. If you could send that to me, we'll put that in the notes. And thanks for being on the inaugural run of the Good Human of the Week, because you're surrounded by a bunch of good humans there, and you and Caleb are awesome human beings too. So
I appreciate it so much. Thank you for reaching out and asking me, and I appreciate you giving me this time to just talk. I hope that I didn't go on and on too long.
No, it's so fine. Like, we like to talk to people, so, and keep us posted on how things are going.
I definitely will.
Well, thanks again for coming on, Carrie.
It was a pleasure.
We're calling this episode The One with All the Nuns.
The one with all the
I love this
nuns.
Title. It's a double
clever
entendre.
Pun.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about religious nuns, NONES,
Yes.
and we're also going to talk about religious nuns, NUNS.
And UNS. See, it's a spelling game too, because we're spelling in grammar nerds. So there's a lot of like information and stuff. And I don't think we're going to get like too super heavy on it, but both of us are like kind of data nerds. You're probably more of a data nerd than I am, because that's your actual like career.
I'm a data person, not a data person. I'm
a data person.
Yes.
I like to say data. I don't know why. I just always have. But anyway, kick us off here of what we're going to talk about.
Since about 1990, vast numbers of Americans have left Christianity and have become non-religious. Non-religious includes atheist, agnostic, and none. So not only that, but the trend seems to be accelerating. So it's increasing. We're going to talk about what factors are impacting the decline of Christianity and also look at what could be the future of the religious landscape in America. So we're going to look at the Pew Research report called Modeling the Future of Religion in America.
So Pew Research it's kind of like the quintessential nonpartisan research organization in the country. They have, if you go on the article, which we'll link to in there, there's actually it's a really long page about their methodology and how they arrive at their data and their conclusions. So they are not a think tank in the sense that their funding and stuff doesn't come from like organizations trying to push an agenda. It's actually more of a fact tank where their funding and stuff comes from organizations that are specifically looking for data that is unbiased. They're actually looking to get to the factual truth about a given topic. And they do a lot more than just religion. They do politics.
Oh, yeah, they do lots of social positions. But they don't take policy positions. That's the important thing, is that they don't have an agenda.
Right. And we'll post the links to their methodology for this specific article and then a little bit about Pew Research in the show notes as well. So from the 1970s to the 1990s, about 90% of Americans identified as Christian. And that stayed very steady during that period. Then suddenly, in the early to mid 90s, that number drops a tiny bit for the first time, with a tiny, tiny rise in the number of religious nuns, NONES. So that trend only continues and speeds up, so that in 2020, the number of Americans who identify as Christian is only at 64%. So we've gone from 90% down to 64% in 30 years. I guess about a percent a year. Yeah, that's a big drop.
It is, yeah. And in that same time, the number of religiously unaffiliated rose from 5% to 29%.
Wow.
That's a huge shift.
And it's interesting because they're jumping completely off the religious bandwagon.
Yeah, the other religions category only rose a few percent. So this report called Modeling the Future of Religion in America, it's the first time they've actually tried to project religious composition in the future. So they go up to the year 2070. And the main variable, so the thing that they change in each of these scenarios, is religious switching. What is religious switching, Phil?
Wouldn't we all like to know? Well, basically, religious switching is a conversion from the religion in which a person is raised and their religious identity in adulthood. So like if you were raised in evangelical Christianity and then you switch to another religion or a nun in adulthood. So that's kind of what switching is.
Or vice versa, right? So
yeah, or vice versa.
Going from a religious
unaffiliation.
Right. Going to a religion. Yeah.
Yeah. The Pew Research Center acknowledges that that doesn't happen in a single moment, that it's a gradual process. And that's what you and I have seen from countless people that we've talked to about their deconstruction and deconversion story. It wasn't just one thing. It was a death of 1,000 cuts.
Very gradual. So we know what the current rate is of religious switching. For people under age 30, switching from Christianity to a non-religion is 31%. So that means that 31% of Christians switch to non-religion before age 30. So switching from a non-religion to Christianity is 21% before age 30. So that's 10 percentage points different. But remember, these population sizes are vastly different. So Christianity, still the majority, is a much larger population. So 31% of Christians becoming non-Christian is a much larger number than 21% of nuns becoming Christian. So that kind of drives this whole trend.
And that's also interesting considering like how hard churches work at targeting children and youth, and they're still behind.
Yeah.
And you can read religious, Christian publications that will say you've got to get your kids in church, because by the time they get to 18 or 20, it's going to be really hard to change their mind because they can think for themselves.
Yeah, right.
They know it too. And even the numbers, with all that pushing, it's not coming to fruition for them. So that's interesting.
Right.
So when does religious switching tend to happen?
So it happens mostly before age 30. Once you're 30, you've pretty much decided what you're going to be. However, we know that's not always true.
Right.
You and I were over age 30.
Yes.
Even though I honestly didn't really believe it before age 30, I just wasn't willing to admit it to myself. I still count as after age 30. So Pew Research Center, they have a theory that once Christianity gets to a point where it's not as mainstream as it once was. So where you can't take it for granted that somebody's a Christian, and it's more socially acceptable to not be a Christian, then those people over 30 who are more casually Christian or loosely Christian, they feel more free to shed that label or that belief.
Yeah.
And they feel like it's less socially taboo to be a non-Christian. So they're going to do it. But then once society in a country reaches that point, there's going to be not much more religious switching after age 30.
Right.
So I think they said like the kids born in the 80s, they're the last group who are going to have religious switching over 30. However, I think statistically that might be true, but like you can figure out at any time that God's not real.
Right.
So I guess it really depends on the reasons why you're becoming a non-Christian. If it's for facts and like intellectual issues, then maybe any age. But if it's for more social issues, then it might be the 30 cutoff. But that's just me theorizing.
Well, and I think that's also the difference between like when you're talking about a group of people on a social network or something, as opposed to something that's statistically significant.
Exactly.
They're using data criteria and research methods to say, okay, after this certain point, you're not going to see religious switching on the scale that would be statistically significant. So there's always going to be people switching, but maybe not in a way that would be super impactful to the overall level of a given religion in the United States. So, and I thought this was pretty interesting that they noticed that religious switching, being non-religious, is what they called stickier than being a Christian. So like stickiness is like how likely you are to stay the way that you were raised. The data showed that if you were raised non-religious, you're way more likely to stay non-religious. But if you're raised Christian, you're more likely to move to non-religion, and it's less sticky. And that's really interesting too. They even had, of course, numbers to back it up. For males who were raised Christian, only 61% were still Christian, but of males who were raised unaffiliated, 74% were still unaffiliated. I got to think that a lot of this has to do with like the access to information too nowadays. Like you just can't snow people with religion the way you could before, thanks to the internet.
Right.
And the abundance of information out there. It's very hard to dupe people that are actually interacting in the world. Now, the groups that keep their people isolated, they're going to be harder to get switched. That's why those stories about, Mormons escaping or Scientologists escaping is so intriguing, because you're like, man, they isolated the crap out of those people and they still got out. Like, that's pretty interesting.
I lost my thought because you blabbered too long.
Damn it. Blabbering, it strikes again.
Okay, so the reason that I think that it's stickier is because Christianity sounds kind of crazy. I mean, you have to be raised in it to think it doesn't sound batshit crazy.
Yeah.
And even if you are raised in it, you still might think it sounds batshit crazy. But the whole concept of the religion and like the story of it is normalized for you if you were raised in it.
Right.
I mean, that would be like us converting to Scientology or some shit like that.
Right.
Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not going to happen because it just sounds crazy. And I think you do see people switching to Christianity like later in life, but it's almost always because they went through some kind of tragedy.
Yes.
They're like, I need something. I need hope. I need to know there's more to this life than the shit that I've been living. And so then they go down the Christian rabbit hole and I mean, they're looking for confirmation that there's more. And so Christianity fits the need. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So we talked about religious switching. That's the main factor that's driving this trend. But there are a few other minor factors that play a part. We'll just touch on them real quick. So they are fertility rates. Christians or non-Christians? Who has more babies? Phil, what do you think?
The Christians are having babies left and right because they're trying to build their army and fill their quivers.
So they have a higher fertility rate for sure.
Yeah.
That is 1.9 children per woman for Christians and 1.6 for non-religious. So Christians are having more babies, but is it making a difference? Not really. Okay, so another thing is intergenerational transmission. This was really interesting to me. Whether parents pass their religion onto their children, and they measure it by the mother. They don't really count what the father does.
Oh, interesting.
Because single parent households tend to have mothers more. And there was one other reason statistically why they chose mothers. I can't remember what it is.
Okay.
All previous studies and reports have assumed that there's a 100% intergenerational transmission rate, but they're finding that that's not always true. So when parents have different religions, or when parents are only loosely affiliated with a religion, they might not pass that religion on to their child.
That's interesting.
And I think more and more people are realizing, let's not indoctrinate our kids. Even if I'm religious,
right,
let's not indoctrinate our kids.
Right.
So they have the freedom to make an informed decision later on.
Yeah.
And so they're taking that into account now on these studies.
That sounds like kind of accurate because like my wife was raised Presbyterian, but not like heavy duty Presbyterian. Like her parents went to church, she went to youth group, but when she became a mother, she didn't automatically go to the Presbyterian church or even go to church really at all, because she was like, I want my kids to decide for themselves what they believe. And
that's amazing. Did she get them baptized?
No, they're not baptized. Nice. There was no talk of religion really. And actually I was the one that brought religion into our relationship, because when we first met, I was still involved in, a progressive Christian church. And even still, I was like, I don't want to indoctrinate them. I just want to expose them to what's out there.
Yeah.
So the Pew Research Center modeled 4 different scenarios to project what the religious landscape could look like by 2070. And really, no matter which one of these scenarios you pick, it doesn't really look great for, the future of Christianity, which it's kind of like, I wonder what Christians would think about this study if they read it. Like they were like, oh no, like, what are they going to do? Are we going to have to go out and evangelize more? Or are they going to be just like, oh, this is bullshit? Like these numbers.
Well, you're making me remember now. I read a Missouri Synod Lutheran report, and it was talking about this very thing. Like, how do we increase our numbers? How do we reverse the trend, the downward trend? Mm-hmm. A lot of it was keeping the kids in the church and indoctrinating them, and then also encouraging our young women members to have more babies.
Right. Yeah.
Like what?
So fertility rates and then intergenerational transfer.
Yeah.
That was their strategy.
Exactly. Phil?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right. So why don't you talk about the first model?
If you're following along at home and you want to see these graphs, just click the link and it's right there in the report. So model 1 is steady religious switching. In this scenario, movement into and out of Christianity remains stable at recently observed rates. So it's not going to speed up. It's not going to slow down.
Okay.
But in this scenario, by 2070, Christianity is 46% of the population. So that's less than half.
Yeah.
The nuns are 41%. And so here the gap has closed significantly from what it was in 1990, which was 90% and 5%.
Yeah.
What is it now again? 65 and
I think it's
29?
64. Yeah, 64 and 29 or something like that.
Okay, 64 and 29. We're narrowing that gap a little, but the lines still have not crossed.
Right.
And so what's model number 2?
Yeah, model 2, they call rising disaffiliation with limits. In this scenario, they're projecting that Christianity, switching out of Christianity, is going to increase. It's going to rise, which sounds pretty reasonable if the trends continue, because basically over the last 30 years, it has been rising. Yeah. But in this scenario, they basically capped the switch rate at 50% for men and 55% for women. So they base this based on Christian retention rates in other countries, which I think they use Great Britain as the model for that, where their lowest retention rate was 49%. So they're assuming that the US rate isn't going to go lower than that. So in this scenario, if they cap it, Christianity drops to 39% and then the nuns rise to 48%. So this is the first scenario where the lines in the graph actually cross and the nuns are in the majority and the Christians are in the minority.
Mm-hmm. So that would be wild.
It really would be wild. Like if you think about how, like, that's why the whole thing, like when I was on vacation, seeing all those churches, like imagine how interesting it would be to like go into a given town and there wasn't a church on every corner. Or you could say, oh, that used to be a church and now it's a skate park.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. What's the third one?
All right. So model 3 is rising disaffiliation without limits. So now we're taking away that 50 and 55% cap, because in this model, there is no limit to the switch rate. So each generation, more and more people switch out of Christianity into non-religion. So in this scenario, we end up with 52% religious nuns and 35% Christians. So not only are there more non-religious people than Christians, but they make up an absolute majority, greater than 50%.
So like an actual majority statistically, as opposed to just more. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility either.
It's not. We'll talk at the end about which one's most likely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's model 4 then?
The last model is basically no switching. So if no more switching happened at all, like after today, then Christianity still shrinks and the nuns still grow, but not to the same extent that we would see in the previous. Christians would be 54%, and then nuns would be 34%.
So why are the numbers moving at all,
Yeah.
Phil?
Why would they move? Yeah, if nobody's switching. Well, because it's a gradual shift that would happen because of age demographics. Christians are older and not childbearing, while the majority of unaffiliated is the childbearing. So just the population changes would actually make the numbers change, just even if everybody stayed the same, that's pretty interesting too. So,
and when you walk into any church, except maybe mega churches, they're all like, I would say 80% of members are over the age of 50, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we see this.
Yeah, if you look at the churches that are struggling and dying, it's because they have no young people.
Yeah.
And then the churches that are thriving and growing is because they are cool and edgy and have really good bands and light shows.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to make a disclaimer that if you're doing the math in your head and you're noticing that these two numbers are not adding up to 100, it's because there's that third category called other religions. And that in all these scenarios has grown from like 6% today to like 12 or 13% by 2070. So that's where the other chunk is.
Okay. Yeah. So there's other religions people might be switching to.
Yeah. Or migrations.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about which one is most realistic. You want to do a quick little recap?
Yeah. Let's do an order from least realistic to most.
Sure.
I say least is no more religious switching. The model number 4 that we just talked about. There is absolutely no way in hell nobody's ever going to switch in or out of a religion after today.
Yeah.
But it is helpful to see what kind of effect religious switching does have on these numbers just by taking it out of the equation entirely.
Mm-hmm. So if you go to model 3, that's the rising disaffiliation without limits. It could happen as more people become non-Christian. The stickiness of non-religion could only increase, making the scenario more plausible. But there's always going to be a solid core of fundamentalist parents who raise children who are unlikely to switch. So that one might not be the most realistic.
Yeah, it could happen.
But
it could be a positive feedback loop. Like the more people who disaffiliate, it encourages other people to disaffiliate.
Right.
It could be. I don't know.
Yeah.
So next, model 1, steady switching. This scenario is pretty conservative because it doesn't accelerate the switching. It just leaves it at a constant rate. So it ignores the fact that switching actually is happening at a faster rate as time goes on. I don't think it's as likely as model number 2, which is rising disaffiliation with limits. So this one is the most likely scenario. I think it is, and also Pew Research says it is. Religious switching continues to increase, but does not exceed the switching rate that has been observed in other countries, which Great Britain. However, recent data in Australia shows that possibly it continues past. So Pew Research is waiting to see how that pans out, and they might update this.
Yeah.
So that would leave the numbers at 39% Christian and 48% religious nuns in 2070.
It's pretty crazy. That's only like, if you think about it, that's 47 years from now.
Yeah, we might not see that.
Yeah, we might be kind of crusty and decrepit by then, but I know I probably will be, or I'm going to be worm food, but
I might be part of a coral reef,
right?
Or planted under a tree.
Yeah, that sounds good. Hey, that's what my wife wants to do.
Cool.
She wants to be planted under a tree too.
Yeah.
So what do you think causes this decrease of religiosity? I mean, we touched on this too, like the advent of the internet and access to information.
Yeah,
that was right in the 90s.
Right when the 90s happened. Right. But the other side of that coin is that it's easier for misinformation to spread. And so if you want to keep believing in Christianity, there's plenty of misinformation for you to find.
Yeah.
I think another factor is that there's an increased acceptance of homosexuality since the 90s. Really, that started in the 90s. And so I think that's turning a lot of, especially young people, away from those like literalist, fundamentalist positions on the Bible and homosexuality. In some cases, turning them away from Christianity altogether.
If I think about my childhood, I didn't know a single gay person. So it was pretty easy for me to view someone who was gay as the other, as a sinner.
Yeah. You hadn't met one.
I had literally never met a gay person, and then later on in my adult life, I met gay people and they were all fantastic people. I mean, you've heard countless of these stories where people say, well, I had a great friend and he or she was gay and I couldn't wrap my head around how God wouldn't love this person, or, and that sent them down the slope of saying, well, there's no way I can believe in a God that would chuck this person into hell because they're a great person. So
yeah. I also think that the increased amount of accessible biblical scholarship, like Bart Ehrman.
Yeah, there's so much.
Yeah, I think before it was mainly biblical scholarship was available to other scholars. or theologians and not necessarily the general public. But now we have YouTubers and podcasts, and there's just more of an openness about biblical scholarship that I think helps people to understand the context of the Bible and the historical settings of the Bible. And
the only way you would access theology kind of in the old days was if you were in seminary, or like if you went to a Christian college and had to take a theology class. Everything else you just kind of accepted from your parents or from your pastor. But now there's so much access to this. Knowledge is power. They kept saying that.
Knowledge is power.
So.
And then another thing that I just thought of is the new atheist movement. Which, when did that start? The 2000s?
Yeah, kind of
like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, and they made atheism, I wouldn't say popular, but they kind of showed the intelligence level of atheists. Wasn't just like, oh, this is like some smart, grumpy people. These people knew how to talk to people, like especially Sam Harris and Neil deGrasse Tyson. Like I could listen to them talk and I'm like amazed by their level of intelligence. Some people don't like Hitchens and Dawkins because they're like what I would have thought an atheist was as a Christian, just like a grumpy old man who hates everyone. But if you get past that demeanor, what they're saying is just rooted in logic and reason. But yeah, the new atheist movement, it's made Christianity look less reasonable.
Yeah. And it really kind of forced atheism like out into the open, whereas before it was maybe just like undertones of society, but now it's like, don't be ashamed of it.
Right. You wouldn't embrace that you were an atheist. Yeah. So the other nuns we wanted to talk about were Catholic nuns. And this is more just kind of an interesting, like, I don't know, factoid. Like, there's 42,000 nuns in America. We're talking about Catholic nuns here.
Currently,
which is 76% drop over the last 50 years. And the average nun age right now is 80 years old. And less than 1% of nuns are under 40.
That's the thing, like, less than 1%.
Yeah, that's crazy.
They're dying. The nunnery is dying. Is that a word? The nunnery?
A nunnery is an actual building, but
okay.
But yes, the idea of people going into the sisterhood is definitely not something that is happening.
Mm-mm. And I think this is just an indicator of religion in general.
Yeah.
The number of Catholic nuns are increasing maybe worldwide or outside of America because just in general, like Christianity is increasing in other countries because of missionary type activities.
Yeah.
But I think that this is just an indicator of the decline of Christianity in America. And I mean, I just find the humor in this, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's hilarious.
1% of nuns are under 40?
It's hilarious. So what does all this mean, like, for those of us who deconstructed or deconverted or somewhere in between? Like, the thing that really stands out to me, like, with all this data is that, you know, if you were raised in Christianity and now you're out, you're not alone. Because when you're in that bubble, you think that's all there is. If you escape that, you're like, oh man, I'm the only one that has done this. Mm-hmm. Where am I going to find support, or how am I going to do this? And then you find out there's hundreds of people on a Facebook group that all went through something similar to you.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, what jumps out to you?
Well,
like,
I think this is a great way to end child indoctrination, because for every person who leaves, so every person who switches is not going to be indoctrinating their children. And then those children aren't going to be indoctrinating their children. And that's how we get rid of it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it will ever be gone entirely. I mean, even the article said that there is like a core of hardcore Christians who are so fundamentalist and so literalist. Like you said, they keep their kids in the bubble.
Yeah.
That there's not much religious switching happening there. It does happen because we know a lot of people who did. But there's always going to be like a solid core of self-sustaining Christians who reproduce and then make more Christians.
Right.
But the large majority of Christians, I think, are going to fall out, and we're going to not indoctrinate our children anymore.
Yeah.
Which is a win.
Yeah. And I think we mentioned this earlier too. There's definitely a lessening of stigmatization about like not being a Christian or not being religious. You know, that, like you just said, there's always going to be pockets and places where it's going to be abnormal for you not to go to church, you know, like places in the South or red states or red counties. But overall, it's like more accepted now that if you don't believe in Jesus or you don't go to church, it doesn't make you like a bad person. And now I think it's even switched a little bit that being a Christian now has a stigma.
A little bit, yeah.
In certain circles, you know, basically, oh, you're a Christian, Now that basically equates with being anti-science, anti-equality, racist, sexist, Trumper, a COVID denier, a QAnon, and that was part of my thing. I was like, when I left Christianity, I was like, I can't be associated with people who would storm the nation's capital with crosses. I can't be associated with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm also interested in seeing what the future is, the next 5 to 10 years of Christianity, because even though I'm still relatively new to the deconstruction movement, because I was already out before I knew even what it was.
Right.
I think that the ex-evangelical movement, the deconstruction movement has been going for like 5 years now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we are going to be seeing the snowballing effects of that. I think that the more people who leave, the more people who are going to go with them.
Yeah.
And right now, we only see stories. We see in our Facebook groups, we see anecdotes.
Right.
It's all anecdotal evidence. But I really am looking forward to seeing what the data is going to show in the next 5 to 10 years.
The second new segment is called Flawed Theology in Real Life. And the idea behind this segment is that there's so much that you see on social media where people are ascribing to flawed logic and fallacious thinking. We would love for people to send in their FTIRL stories. Can we start a hashtag? You think we could be popular enough to get Flawed Theology in Real Life just trending on Twitter?
We can manifest it. Let's manifest it.
Not on Twitter, though, because Elon Musk sucks now.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, so today's Flawed Theology in Real Life story is one that I've been following for the past few weeks since before Christmas. It's a friend of mine who he and his wife are pastors of a church that I went to right after college. Like the first church I went to after college, I was on the worship team there. I actually met my first wife there. So that was my whole first adult Christian experience. That took over this dying Wesleyan church and turned it into a massive, trendy church for pretty people. And these two people are very pretty themselves, and they have 5 very pretty adult children. And one of them recently had a child who was born with a very rare heart defect. Immediately had to get medevaced to UVA, which is a prestigious research hospital. And they saved this kid's life. They saved this baby's life. And she had a very difficult journey. And I just was following these posts. I'm not going to read all the posts, but the posts were just filled with prayers for this and miracles for that. And God sent us these doctors, and the mom and dad want to pray for this baby in the room next to them because that God will send them a miracle. And their community rallied around them, of course, with this big outpouring of prayers. Like all the comments were just like prayers, 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 and like the prayer emoji, which is really the high five emoji that everyone thinks is praying. But there's all these posts about, oh, it's a miracle. Like she didn't have any seizures. The pictures of this poor baby, she's this big. She's got an incision down her chest. She's on a ventilator. She's got fluids. She's got all the stuff that just is just heartbreaking. And I can't imagine what it was like for that family to watch that happen, especially like right around the holidays and all that time when you're supposed to just be happy. And the baby survived. The baby actually came home a few days ago, and, she's not out of the woods, but they kept citing God this and God that. And the doctors and nurses said they referred to this child's outcome as remarkable. That's what the doctor said, which of course it is. Like anytime you see something like that happen, it's remarkable. And then of course this person posted, well, we call it a miracle. Praise Jesus. So why is this flawed theology? Like what's wrong with this?
Where do we start?
Yeah.
So the first thing that I think of is when they give credit to God for saving the baby instead of the doctors or the nurses, or saying that God sent the doctors and the nurses, that does not make logical sense, because think about the time before modern medicine was a thing. All right. So there were thousands of years of human history where this baby would have just died.
Right.
Okay. Millions of people died because of lack of adequate medical care, because humans just hadn't developed it yet. Where was God then?
Right.
How come God can't send doctors and nurses unless doctors and nurses have already been invented by people?
Right.
That should be your first clue that God's got nothing to do with this.
Right. And why would a loving God allow a newborn baby to be born to one of his faithful servants with a near fatal heart problem? How is that loving? It's like,
this is kind of how I think of that God's trying to teach you a lesson, or teach you the value of suffering, or to teach you that you need him, or to teach you how great he is. Okay. So those are all kind of the things that Christians could say.
Right.
Well, let's imagine a human being. So I have a puppy and I want this puppy to appreciate me. So I hold this puppy on top of a campfire until it gets 3rd-degree burns. And then at the last second before this puppy dies, I take the puppy out of the fire and I say to this puppy, how great am I that I took you out of this fire?
Right.
Please thank me.
Yeah.
And then I take the puppy to the vet and I wrap it up in bandages and whatever, and I get it medical care. And I'm like, puppy, how great am I that I got you medical care?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. If God has control of everything that happens in our life, or the ability to control everything that happens in our life, then he either gave that baby that defect or he just allowed it.
He allowed it. Right.
Either way, it's bad.
Right. And why does God get the credit for the miracle? And what happens if that baby died?
Oh, then that baby got its wings and is another angel in heaven.
Yeah, she's in heaven and blah, blah. And then, God sent us amazing doctor. No, God didn't send them. You went to a premier university research hospital where thousands of people are employed, where it's their job to save your kid's life.
Yeah.
That's what their job is. Like, God had nothing to do with those people at the hospital.
No.
Prayer didn't have anything to do with it either.
If anybody can say that God had anything to do with any of these processes, then I can say that Thor did it.
Right.
There's just as much evidence for that. You can say that any invisible entity did something that a human actually did.
Right.
But there's no evidence for it. So how can you claim it?
Right. And then, but no one ever thinks about the converse side. Like, if the baby died, would God get the blame? No, of course not. It was all in his plan. And what about the baby in that next room? I haven't seen any updates about this other baby.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
well, that's
I
like
don't know
what Carrie was saying with like the tenants on the other side. Like, yeah, so I understand why people think this way, because it gives them hope and praying. It gives them a sense that they have control in a situation where they are very helpless.
Right. And that's like one of those things is like, is it wrong or bad to respond this way in crisis? I don't think it's bad per se, but now, like, on the other side of this, to me, it minimizes and it shortcuts it. Like, if it was a tragedy where someone dies, it shortcuts the grief process completely because you can't actually process it. It's a false hope. Like, it's just a placebo.
Yeah.
Like, it makes you feel better about the situation because we feel helpless in that situation. We can't do anything to affect that outcome. And even the doctors and nurses with all their specialized knowledge and care, sometimes it doesn't go well.
Yeah.
Sometimes people die, even with expert medical care. God doesn't get any blame for that. They don't say, oh, well, God fucked that one up. Oh, well,
I would love for somebody to say that.
Yeah.
Another thing I just thought of is that in one of their posts, they said something like, God heard our unified cries. And that stuck out to me. Does God need more than one voice asking for something in order to listen?
Right.
Is one person not enough?
Yeah. How many people does it take to get God's attention?
That's exactly it.
This is one baby in one emergency room in one hospital in Virginia. What about the millions of Ukrainians right now that are under rubble from being shelled by Russian dictatorship?
And the other thing is, why does God need to be asked?
Right. Yeah.
Why does God need to be asked to save the Ukrainian babies?
Right.
Why do we need to ask God to save a baby?
Yeah. It shouldn't be something you should have to ask for. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our season premiere, and the new features will be honing them to professional precision over the next
Will we though?
15 episodes, allegedly. But we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flawed Theology podcast. We appreciate you listening. I'm Phil.
And I'm Susie. Tune in next time where we will continue to tackle the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
Woohoo! Follow us at theflawedtheologypodcast.com and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Rate and review us on Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you might find us. And we hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time. So,
Can we take 3 seconds so I can put my sweatshirt on?
Sure. It must be cold in the fields where you are. Oh, you disappeared.
Okay.
You didn't hear me, but I said it must be cold in the field where you are. And then when you put the sweatshirt on, you totally disappeared.
I disappeared
from the
and
view.
I came back. sweatshirt on.
It's like Field of Dreams. If you put the sweatshirt on, she will come. That's hilarious. Oh, I'm waiting for Kevin Costner to come out of these reeds. Fucking things up here.
Hang on, I have to grab my laptop charger. I have 5 minutes left on my battery.
Uh-oh. What's really funny is when you went out the door, the background didn't change. Which, of course, you can't hear me saying.
I plugged my laptop into the grass.
I know. It was funny because when you went out the door or whatever, the grass didn't move. Like, your arm disappeared into the field and you came out with a charger. It's like, it's fantastic. Like, yeah.
It really is magical.
It really is. Zoom is magic.